His mother told him on a Thursday evening, standing by the window with her back to him. She said, "Your father went to the shrine the night you were born. I do not know everything that was said. I know he made a vow. I know it involved you. I know he never told you because he never told me the whole of it either. And then he died." And now she gestured at the air between them, the air that held the weight of 3 broken engagements and a village gone quiet around her son. Now it is here. 22 years before that evening, the village had not seen rain in 4 months. They had stopped calling it a famine. They called it the season. Instead, the way you give a frightening thing a smaller name so you can continue living alongside it. The cassava had come up thin. The yam mounds had dried from the outside in, still holding their shape on the surface, already hollow underneath. Elder Tobena Ofo was not a man who visited shrines. He was a Christian of the moderate. Practical sort Bible on the table. Prayers before meals. The kind of faith that asks little and expects little in return. He had married in a church. He had buried his parents with a priest present. But on the night of the 23rd of August, with the village's last communal grain store down to what could fit in 2 medium sacks, and his wife Ngozi screaming through a difficult labor in the back room, he walked to the shrine of Onwa at the edge of the farmland, alone, at the hour when sensible men were inside their homes. He had not planned what he would say. He arrived the way a drowning man arrives at something floating, not with strategy, but with the pure animal logic of desperation reaching for whatever is within reach. He knelt before the low clay platform and the tall standing stone and said, "The village is dying. Let the rains come. Whatever the price is, I will pay it." No voice answered. The night did not shift. He walked home feeling slightly foolish, the way you feel after crying in private lighter, but uncertain whether anything has actually shifted. He arrived just as his son's cry split the dark. 3 days later, the rains came, not a drizzle, but a full, sustained rain that broke the famine's back entirely. The village stood in it with their faces raised, making an expression that had no name in any language Tobena knew. He stood among them with his infant son wrapped against his chest and told himself, "It would have rained anyway. That is what rain does." He told himself this carefully, the way you build a wall between yourself and something you do not want to look at directly. He went inside. He named his son Emeka. God has done great things. He never returned to the shrine, never spoke of what he had said there, not to his wife, not to his son, not to anyone. He raised the boy with the quietly over-attentive love of a man who knows, in the part of himself he does not examine, that he is loving borrowed time. And then he died on a Wednesday afternoon without warning, and the debt, finally untethered from the man who made it, turned slowly around and found the next name it knew. Emeka Ofo was 22 years old, the only son of a dead man, a schoolteacher in the village where he had been born. Until the year the troubles started, his life had the quality of something moving in the right direction. He was not brilliant in the dazzling, visible way that makes people point and say, "That one will go far." He was intelligent in the quieter, more durable way. His father had died 14 months before this story begins. He had one thing he used to say to Emeka when the day had been difficult. "You are not finished yet." He said it about homework. He said it about dry seasons. He said it about arguments with friends. Emeka had not understood until much later that his father might have been saying it to himself as much as to his son, that the man giving the advice needed it as badly as the boy receiving it. She was from Oguta, a schoolteacher like Emeka, quiet in the way that has depth to it rather than emptiness. They met at a teacher's workshop in March, the kind of regional gathering everyone attends with mild reluctance. Emeka had brought a book he intended to read during the lunch break. He did not read it. By the time the morning session ended, he had already been talking to Adise for 10 minutes about a book she was reading by the same author as his, though neither of them had finished their respective copies and the unread book in his bag had already stopped mattering. They talked about what it means to stay in the place you come from when leaving is an option. About the specific rewards and specific frustrations of teaching children who know you, whose parents know your parents. By the time the afternoon session started, something had already been decided between them that neither had yet put into words. It was the kind of recognition that does not require language, because language would only make it smaller. Emeka's mother liked her immediately, not in the cautious, evaluative way that mothers sometimes like the women their sons bring home liking. That is really a form of assessment. The families met. A date was agreed for the formal introduction. Emeka drove home that evening in a state he was privately trying not to call happiness, because happiness at 22 and 14 months after his father's death felt like something requiring careful approach. Adise fell ill on the 4th day after the engagement. It started as a headache. By the 2nd day, it was a fever that no medicine touched, not the tablets from the pharmacy, not the herbs the older women prepared, not the prayer said over her by the pastor her mother called. By the 3rd day, she had stopped eating, stopped speaking in full sentences, was staring at the ceiling with the fixed, bewildered expression of someone listening to a sound that exists just below the range that other people can hear. Her mother brought her home to Oguta. The fever broke before they reached the junction. By the time the car reached her father's compound, she was sitting upright, asking for food, wondering why her head felt so strange. The family sent word back carefully, without accusation, because the strangeness of it had not yet hardened into anything they had a name for. Emeka's mother received the message with a careful face and said nothing to her son. She was still saying nothing when Adise, recovered and slightly embarrassed, returned to Emeka's village. The fever came back the same evening. This time it lasted 5 days. This time it arrived fully formed, without the preliminary headache, as though it had simply been waiting at the edge of the village and walked back in when she did. Her temperature climbed in a way that alarmed the nurse. She spoke in fragments that bore no relation to each other. She called out names that no one in the room had heard before. On the 5th day her father came. He was a tall man with the deliberate movements of someone who has learned to control his temper through sheer physical slowness over many years. He had raised 4 children and buried 1. And all of that was in the quality of how he sat across from Emeka in the parlor. Settled, considered, already decided, doing the courtesy of a face-to-face delivery, because he was that kind of man. "I do not think you are a bad man." He said it carefully, with the precision of someone who has prepared this sentence and is delivering it exactly as prepared. "But something is wrong in this compound. And my daughter," a pause, the pause of someone who has reached the edge of the prepared speech and is now speaking from somewhere rawer. "She will not be the one who finds out what it is." He left with Adise. He did not look back. In a city, this would have been gossip for a week and then forgotten. In the village, it became the kind of story that attaches itself to a person's name and walks alongside them everywhere they go. Not shouting, simply accompanying, present in every space, subtly altering the quality of the air around the person it has chosen. 3 weeks after Adise's father took his daughter home, when Emeka walked to the junction to buy credit for his phone. Boniface, a man he had known since primary school, who had been at his father's burial, who had called him brother for 20 years without irony, was coming from the other direction. Boniface saw him from 30 meters away, made a small calculation behind his eyes, and crossed to the other side of the road, unhurriedly, as though he had always intended to walk on that side, as though they had not seen each other. Emeka bought his credit. He walked home. He did not mention it to anyone, not because it was not worth mentioning, but because to mention it would be to make it real in a way he was not yet ready for. He threw himself into teaching, arriving before the other teachers, staying after them, sitting with struggling children in the late afternoon, working through the same problems again until something clicked. He smiled at the right moments and laughed when laughter was expected, and carried himself with the deliberate normalcy of someone who understands that visibly falling apart will only confirm what people have already begun to suspect. He walked home in the evenings to a compound that felt increasingly like a place that was holding its breath. His mother was carrying something. He could see it in the way she moved around him carefully, like a person navigating a room in the dark, afraid of what their foot might find. The quality of her silences had changed. They were not the ordinary silences of a woman at rest, but the silences of a woman actively engaged in the work of not speaking 6 months after Adise's father walked out without looking back, Emeka's uncle came with a proposal. He had found a girl, her name was Chisom, practical, cheerful in a way that was constitution rather than performance, from a family his uncle trusted. 2 is not a pattern, his uncle said. 1 is a bad event, this will be different. Emeka looked at his uncle and thought, "You do not actually believe that." He agreed to the meeting anyway, because he was tired in the way that makes resistance feel like one more weight to carry when you are already at capacity. Chisom was as described direct, honest, in her self-assessment and her assessment of him, the kind of person who does not perform uncertainty when she is not uncertain. She was not Adise. Emeka had been trying to stop using that as a benchmark, imperfectly, and with genuine effort, the only way such things are tried. Chisom fell ill on the second day. It was faster this time, more decisive, as though whatever was doing this had grown impatient with the graduated approach and had decided that subtlety had been extended its full allocation. By the third morning, she was in a state that frightened the older women who came to sit with her, a deep, unreachable confusion, the consciousness of a person who has gone somewhere interior and does not know how to come back. She was taken home before the week was out. She recovered in 48 hours. No one came to the parlor this time. Her family closed a door, and the closing of it was a complete and sufficient statement. Emeka understood that the door was not going to open again, and that no explanation would change this. Because her family had not made their decision about him, they had made it about the pattern. He sat in his father's old chair that night. For the first time, the chair people had been unconsciously sitting around for 14 months. He sat in it and did not sleep, and did not pray, and did not think very clearly about anything. He simply sat in the particular quiet of a man who has finally stopped hoping for a different explanation and has begun the work of accepting the actual shape of the thing. He thought about Adise's father. He thought about Chisom's family closing their door. He thought about the 2 events side by side and the shape they made together, the shape that his uncle had refused to call a pattern and that everyone else in the village had already named without saying it to his face. He thought, whatever this is, it knows what it is doing. It is not random, and it is not finished, and pretending otherwise will cost more women more than he is willing to let it cost. It was the first clear thought he had had in months. It did not feel like progress. It felt like the particular cold clarity of a person who has finally stopped lying to themselves, which is not comfort, but is at least honest ground to stand on. The third engagement was his uncle's doing again, and his aunt's, and hardest to refuse his mother's. The 3 of them sat in the compound on a Sunday afternoon and applied the gentle, inexorable pressure of people who love someone and cannot accept what is happening to him. His mother's participation surprised him. He understood later that she was doing the only thing available to her within the constraint of what she was carrying. She could not tell him the truth yet, but she could not watch him give up either, because his giving up had its own consequences. She was not prepared to accept. The third bride's name was Ogena, 25, a trader with her own stall at the main market, self-sufficient and direct in her speech. She had heard about Adise and Chisom, considered this information carefully, and decided she was not deterred. This was either brave or stubborn or both, and under different circumstances, Emeka thought he could have loved her for it. She lasted 4 days. Her father came with her brothers. They stood in the compound with the composed authority of men who have already finished their internal conversation and arrived only to deliver its conclusion. The eldest spoke without raising his voice, which is the register that carries the most weight. Whatever is in this place, we are taking our sister away from it. We ask that your family not contact ours again. They left. The compound settled back into its ordinary dimensions but felt somehow smaller, as though their presence had made visible the amount of space the trouble was taking up. And now that they were gone, there was only the trouble itself, present and unmediated. Emeka's mother stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her son sit down slowly on the front step and put his face in his hands. She stood there for a long time. She opened her mouth twice, closed it both times. She had been carrying this for 22 years. She was so tired of carrying it, and so she stood by the window with her back to him because she could not watch it land, and she finally, after 22 years, put it down. "Your father," She stopped. Started again. The night you were born, he went to the shrine. Onwa, you know the one at the edge of Adamu's farm. Emeka said nothing. His hands came together between his knees. He waited. He made a vow. I wasn't there. I was inside. The labor was very bad that night, and he went out. And I didn't ask why. When he came back, you were already here. 3 days later, the rains came. And he never in 22 years, he never said a word to me about what he said at that shrine. The generator hummed outside. A child laughed somewhere down the road. How long have you known? Emeka said. Not a question. The beginning of an accounting. She didn't answer immediately. The not answering was its own answer. Mama, Ogena's brothers were in this compound 3 weeks ago. You were standing in that doorway. He paused. You already knew. I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe I was wrong about what I thought. I thought if we found the right girl, maybe it would. But you pushed for Ogena. She said nothing. The silence was its own admission. You knew something was wrong and you still put another woman in front of it. I wanted. She stopped herself before she finished. Whatever she wanted was too small to say in this room right now, sitting next to what she had just put down. He loved you. Whatever he did, I know. He stood. Not toward her. Simply stood. That is the part that makes it complicated. He walked to the door. Stopped in the frame with his back to her, the same posture she had held at the window. Neither of them registered this consciously. But it was there. 2 people in the same room using the same gesture. The universal human posture of I cannot watch this land. Then he walked out. The door closed with the ordinary sound of a door closing, which is almost worse than a slam. The cemetery is a 10-minute walk from the compound. Emeka has not been here since the burial 14 months ago, when he stood in a borrowed suit in the collective formulaic grief of a funeral and received condolences from people who gripped his hand a little too firmly, the way people do when they are also, through the handshake, reassuring themselves about something they cannot name. He crouches beside his father's grave in the dark and speaks, not performing grief for any audience, but simply talking to the only other holder of this specific weight, the person who carries the other half of this particular thing and will carry it, in whatever form the dead carry things, indefinitely. I keep trying to be angry at you and it keeps not being clean enough, because I understand why you did it, and that is the whole problem. I understand and I wish I didn't. If I didn't understand, I could just be angry, and that would be simpler. A night bird calls from the trees. On the road behind him, a car passes with its radio, on a few seconds of music trailing into the dark, then silence closing back over it. The village was dying. I was being born. You were out of options and you went to the only door you hadn't tried yet. You were afraid and you loved this village and you loved my mother and you wanted your son to live. I know all of that. I am not standing here in the dark telling you it was unreasonable. His voice goes quieter. But you made me the price. And then you watched me grow up for 22 years and never said it. You let me walk toward my future carrying a debt I didn't know was there. You let me sit in your chair after Chisom's family left. You were a year in the ground by then, but the silence you built around this was still standing. Still doing its work long after you were gone, to keep it yourself. He picks up a small stone from beside the mound and turns it over in his fingers. I'm not going to honor it. I need you to know that. I'm going to fight it whatever that costs, because I cannot live as the answer to a question you asked without me. I won't do it. He sets the stone down on the concrete surround. Gently. I think you would understand that. I think you would. He is not entirely sure he believes this. He says it anyway, because sometimes the generous reading of a person is its own form of work, and the work matters regardless of whether it is deserved. He stands, brushes the dust from his trousers, and walks back toward the compound, not to sleep, to decide. The spiritualist's name was Okeke. He lived on the far side of the village in a plain compound, zinc roof, swept yard, 2 goats near the gate, ordinary clothes on a clothesline. Emeka's mother had known of him for years in the careful, indirect way that people in villages know of certain individuals, not through their own direct experience. but through accumulated testimony offered in low voices. She mentioned his name the morning after the confession, tentatively, watching Emeka's face as she said it. He had spent the night in his father's chair, doing the slow, unglamorous work of arriving at a position he could actually stand in. By morning, he had arrived. He was not at peace. He was simply ready, which is a different thing and, in the circumstances, sufficient. They went together the following Tuesday. Okeke received them without ceremony, offered water, and settled himself on a low wooden stool. He listened to everything without interrupting, not the listening of someone waiting to speak, but the listening of someone allowing what is being given to find its shape before he responds to it. He asked no questions while they spoke. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I will need 3 days." He did not explain what for. They did not ask. On the 4th day, a boy came to the compound. Emeka should come alone. The room at the back of Okeke's house was plain, a shelf with small vessels and dried bundles, a woven mat, a single window. Not the room Emeka had half imagined. No theatrical darkness, no accumulated mystery. Simply a room where serious work was done, serious enough that it required no decoration. Okeke looked at him directly. Your father made a vow in the year of the great dry season. He went to the shrine of Onwa and offered the future of his firstborn child in exchange for rain. The formulation he used was open-ended, whatever the price is. This transfers the price setting entirely to the other party. There is no upper limit established, no negotiation available after the fact. Onwa accepted. The rains came. Your father went home, named you, and said nothing for the rest of his life. "I know," Emeka said. "My mother told me." Okeke looked at him with something unreadable. "I know she did." A beat. Something shifted in the room the way a room shifts when something that was previously unacknowledged has been acknowledged. "You knew my father," Emeka said, flat, not a question. Okeke was quiet for a moment, not evasively, with the specific quiet of someone deciding how much of a true thing to say. "I knew he was going to the shrine that night. Someone in the village told me someone who was worried about him that week, who thought he was in a very dark place. I did not go to him." A pause. "I told myself it was not my business. That men make their own decisions." Smaller pause. "I have thought about that decision of mine more than once since then." The silence that followed now contained 2 men sitting with the weight of things they did not do, a different weight from things they did, heavier in some ways because it has no clear shape and cannot be undone. Just the question of what would have happened if someone had walked toward the man instead of away from him. "What am I actually dealing with?" Emeka said finally. "Practically. What does the vow mean for me right now?" "It means your domestic future, your marriage. Your family line was consecrated to Onwa's service. The women become ill because the vow treats any movement toward that future as a violation of the terms it set. It is not personal to the women. Onwa has no particular interest in them as individuals. The vow simply does not leave room for them. It was not designed with them in mind. My father is dead." "Yes. The man who made the agreement is dead. He left the debt open and went." "Yes." Okeke said this with the evenness of a man who has learned that the truth does not require apology. That is the situation. Emeka was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of a man working something out as he says it, thinking aloud with precision, needing to get the shape of the thing right before he can respond to it properly. A man offers another person as currency. The man dies. The debt moves to the currency. The currency is expected to pay not because it agreed, not because it was told, but because it was named. "I am not here to tell you what is expected or what is just," Okeke said. "I am here to tell you what the situation is and what choices exist within it. Tell me the one that isn't becoming a shrine caretaker first." Something close to surprise crossed Okeke's face, not at the content, but at the directness of it, which was its own kind of information about the man sitting across from him. The counter-rite. "You challenge the vow on the grounds that a man cannot offer what is not his. Your life was not your father's to give. Does that work? Sometimes. What does sometimes mean? It means I have seen it work and I have seen it fail, and I cannot tell you in advance which this will be. Emeka nodded the slow nod of a man filing something he does not like under necessary truth. Something to be carried rather than resolved. The other path. You honor the vow, the shrine, unmarried. The debt is settled completely and finally. That is not a path. That is a sentence. Okeke looked at him without agreement or disagreement. The counter-rite requires a year of sustained specific service to this community. Real work, with real cost work that goes beyond what you already do. There are people in this village who need things that no one is currently providing. You will find them and provide those things consistently enough and thoroughly enough that the demonstration is genuine rather than performed. Not for the village's benefit and not for mine, for the rights. The right needs to see that you are a man of genuine account before it accepts your argument that you were wrongly made into currency. And if the counter-rite fails, Okeke did not look away. Then you will have your answer. And you will face the first path knowing you did not arrive at it by default, that you chose the harder road, did the work it required, and received your answer from the outcome rather than from avoidance. A pause. That is not nothing. That is in fact a great deal. What would you choose? Emeka said. The old man was quiet, actually thinking, which looks different from performing deliberation. I would choose the one I could stand behind, he said finally, and then I would find out what that costs. Emeka left Okeke's compound and walked home through the afternoon heat with the particular quality of a man who has just been handed the full shape of what he is dealing with and is carrying it consciously for the first time. Heavier than carrying it without knowing, but navigable in a way that carrying it without knowing is not. He was not at peace. He was simply oriented, which is what clarity actually feels like, as opposed to what people expect it to feel like. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment, tell us what you would choose if you were Emeka. We read every one. Now back to the story. He sent a message to Adise through a mutual friend. Not to propose anything. Not to revisit what had been between them, only to tell her. Because she deserved to know what had actually happened. Why it had happened. That it had not been about her, had never been about her. That the illness that had taken her twice was not a judgment on who she was, but the operation of something that predated her, predated Emeka, predated the workshop in March, and the unfinished books, and everything that had been decided between them without words. She replied that she was willing to meet. She was already at the chop bar when he arrived, which meant she had been early, which meant she had thought carefully about whether to come, decided yes, and then arrived too soon while trying to look like she hadn't thought about it. He registered this and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of courtesy, the courtesy of not making someone explain themselves when the explanation is already visible. He sat across from her. She looked at him with the direct, unceremonious attention she had always had. You look tired, she said. I am tired. Okay. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Tell me. He told her everything, the vow, the shrine, his father, the grave, Okeke, the two paths, and what each required. He watched her face while he talked, and her face did the thing it always did, stayed present, stayed with him, didn't go somewhere else. He had tried to forget this about her. He had not entirely succeeded. When he finished, she was quiet. So, the illness. She said it slowly, as though testing the weight of the sentence before committing to it. When I came back the second time, that wasn't me. It wasn't anything I did. It wasn't something wrong with me specifically. No, She stopped. I thought there was something wrong with me that I couldn't see, couldn't name, couldn't fix. Something that just rejected the idea of me with you, specifically. And I've been trying to figure out what it was for months. She looked out toward the market. That is a long time to think that about yourself. I'm sorry. You didn't know. No, but. Emeka, you didn't know. She looked back at him. Something in her face had settled, or stopped pretending. What do you want to do? I want to fight it. Okay. That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something. Tell me it's the right choice. I can't tell you that. She said it quietly, without apology. I don't know if it's the right choice. Nobody knows that yet. A pause that carried more than its length. I know it's yours. That has to be enough. He nodded. He was not sure it was enough. He could see she was not sure either. Neither of them said this. They left it on the table with the empty cups, unclaimed, one of those honest silences that hold more than words do, that do the work words would only diminish. She paid for her tea before he could reach for his wallet. She stood up with the easy, undemonstrative finality of someone who has said what needed saying and does not need to extend the moment past its natural length. She walked back toward the market without looking back, not coldly, simply with the composure of a person who trusts the other to carry what they have been given without needing to be watched carrying it. He sat for a while after she left. He thought about what she had not said. I will wait. He thought about what he had not said. Please wait. He left both sentences where they were and walked back to give Okeke his answer. The counter-rite was not a ceremony on a specific afternoon. It was what Okeke had said it was, a year. Emeka rose before the school day to sit with the elderly man at the far end of the compound road, a man named Chukwudi who had outlived everyone who had originally surrounded him, whose mornings had become simply empty in the way that is not peaceful but just vacant, and who needed someone to talk to and someone to ensure he had eaten. Some mornings, Chukwudi wanted to talk about his dead wife, going over the same stories, the way very old people do, not from confusion, but because the repetition is a form of maintenance, a way of keeping the person real, of insisting on their continued existence against the pressure of their absence. Emeka learned to receive the same stories with the same quality of attention each time, which is harder than it sounds and more valuable than it looks. Some mornings, Chukwudi wanted to argue about football. Some mornings, he said nothing, and they sat and watched the compound road come to life, and that was sufficient. He spent his weekends running sessions for children whose parents could not afford lessons, a larger number than he had known before he started paying attention, which is often the case with things that need doing. You do not see how many there are until you start doing them. On the third Saturday, a 7-year-old girl named Ngozi got the long division problem correct that she had been failing for 3 weeks. She looked at the paper, then at Emeka, then at the paper again, with the expression of someone who has not yet decided whether to trust good news. The careful expression of a child who has been disappointed enough times to know that good news and reliable news are not the same thing. He said, "You did that." She said, "I know." She picked up her pencil and moved to the next problem without ceremony. Emeka had to look away for a moment. Boniface, the man who had crossed the road that morning weeks after Adise, stopped Emeka outside the water tank one afternoon and asked how he was keeping, and waited for the actual answer rather than the performed one. The question was small. The waiting was not small. Emeka told him the truth, not all of it, but enough of it. The amount that could be received between two men at a water tank on an ordinary afternoon, and Boniface listened and said, "I should have come to you sooner." Emeka said, "You are here now." They left it there, which was the right place to leave it. The village noticed. Villages always notice. What changed was the quality of the noticing, the sideways attention shifting, slowly and without announcement, toward the ordinary kind. At the end of the year, Okeke came to the shrine of Onwa. Emeka came alone. The ceremony was solemn and unhurried and completely, without drama, no lightning, no shift in the air. There was ritual and silence, and Okeke's voice moving through the forms of the counter-rite with the precision of long practice and the particular gravity of a man who is, through this ceremony, also discharging something of his own, the weight of the door he did not walk toward 22 years ago. When it ended, Okeke said simply, "Wait." 3 weeks. Emeka went to school, sat with Chukwudi, marked his papers, slept and woke and did it again, living his ordinary life with the care of someone who has understood that the ordinary life is not the space between significant events. It is the substance of a person, the accumulated weight of how they spend the days that do not seem to matter, which are most of the days there are, and which are the days that actually make you into who you are. On a Tuesday in the dry season, he sent a message to Adise. She came back to his village. She did not fall ill. She sat in the compound with Mama Ngozi through the afternoon. Mama Ngozi made tea and said very little, and held herself with the stillness of a woman trying not to make anything of a moment by making too much of it, which is its own kind of love, the restraint of it. The evening came. Adise took the last bus back to Oguta, healthy and whole and entirely herself, which is what she had always been, and what the vow had made temporarily unavailable. Emeka sat in his father's chair that night. Not because he had nowhere else to put himself tonight, he sat in it because he wanted to. Because it had been his father's chair, and he was his father's son, and those two things were true simultaneously, with everything else that was true, the vow, the silence, the 22 years, the 3 broken engagements, the year of Chukwudi's mornings, and Ngozi's long division, and Okeke's quiet ceremony, and Adise sitting across from him at a small table with her hands around a cup, telling him the choice had to be his, and he was learning, slowly and with genuine effort, that this kind of simultaneity was not a problem requiring resolution. It was simply the condition of being a person with a history. He thought about his father without bitterness. He thought about a man who had stood in the dark at a shrine at the edge of a dying village, who had said whatever the price is and had not understood the full weight of what he was saying, because desperate men rarely do. Who had spent 22 years raising his son with the over-attentive love of someone who knows, in the part of himself he never examines, that what he is loving is borrowed. Who had been, in almost every particular, a good man whose goodness had not prevented him from doing something that cost his son enormously. Because goodness and wisdom do not always occupy the same person at the same time, and love is not a guarantee against damage, only against intention. That, Emeka thought, sitting in the wide-armed wooden chair in the corner of the sitting room, was going to have to be enough, not today, but it was moving in the direction of enough, which was more than he had had a year ago, and more than he had expected to have when the evening started. His father had bought life with a name. The son had bought his name back with a life of his own choosing. Whether Onwa had accepted this as full settlement, whether any such arrangement is ever fully settled, or whether it simply ceases to operate when both parties have genuinely discharged what they owe, Emeka could not say. Okeke had not said either. Some questions do not arrive with the kind of answer that removes all subsequent doubt. They arrive with a direction, and the direction holds, and you walk in it, and you find out what the walking costs, and then you find out what it was worth. The rain still came every season, and Emeka, standing at the front of his classroom on the first morning of the new term, watching 23 children arrange themselves into something that would eventually become Rose the Beautiful, resistant chaos of children who do not yet know that sitting still will eventually be required of them, thought briefly of his father. Not with bitterness. With something that was not yet forgiveness, but was close to it and moving steadily closer, which is how most forgiveness actually works, not as an event, but as a direction, not as an arrival. As a way of walking. He turned to the board and began. That is the story of Emeka Ofo, a man who was made into a price and chose to buy himself back. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Stories from This Side of the Continent. We will see you in the next one.